Hello, and welcome back to another edition of the Creamsicle Chronicle podcast. My name is JT Olson, and unfortunately, once again, my co host Garrett Ballard could not be here tonight. And honestly, I thought we had it. I thought the stars were going to align this week. He had an obligation on Friday, a work conflict. He said, "Hey, we're going to move it back to Sunday because I really want to talk about the Senior Bowl. We got big things to talk about this week." So we moved it back here to Sunday. And unfortunately, a family emergency took him away from the podcast. So, Garrett, wishing you and your family the best. Sorry you weren't able to be here. Hasn't been here yet since we moved our platform, but that's okay. Great content in the future. He is going to be all about the quality of content. Not so much the quantity right now, but he will absolutely bring the quality. And I got his homework assignment, so I'm going to relay his prospects to watch when we talk Senior Bowl later on. But before we do that, it's been a week since the Bucs lost their playoff game to the Lions, and I haven't got on here to talk about it yet. And it's just one of those things where what is there to say? Bucs went out. They didn't play a clean game. They turned the ball over. They dropped passes. They were sloppy, and they lost. For a lot of the game, I thought it went exactly how I expected it to. It was tied at 17 going into the fourth quarter. It was right there for you. And the mistakes eventually just caught up to them. They couldn't slam the door home on a run. They got gashed for a touchdown. They let Amon-Ra beat them in the end zone, went up 2 scores. Had a chance to march down the field, tie the game, go to overtime. And it was that not so timely Baker Mayfield interception. And, it wasn't a good interception by any means. But it wasn't a brain dead interception either. He tested a linebacker who has never had an interception in his career, and he stepped up and made the play. Tried to force it in there when he shouldn't have. And that was all she wrote. Baker played a pretty solid game overall. Threw for almost 350 yards. He had some misses, but I wouldn't say this was a Baker Mayfield loss. I'm more frustrated with dropped passes, more frustrated with, at times I felt like the game plan was conservative. I felt like when they opened it up and threw it downfield, they were effective, which, we knew they would be looking at these Lions corners. I felt they could have run the ball more because they were actually very effective with it. And it's hard to find the perfect balance of running and throwing. And a lot of times I've been critical of when Dave Canales has called too many runs. But, I wanted them to run the ball a little bit more. I wanted them to push the ball a little bit more downfield. I thought they'd settled for some dink and dunk kind of stuff too often. And at the end of the day, they came up short. They weren't the better team on the field that day. I really do believe that those two teams are just about equal in talent. And, if they played 100 games, it'd probably be close to a 50-50 split. But on this day, it's all that matters is they weren't the better team. They got, in their own way, Bucs beating Bucs. And that's all it takes in the playoffs. You can't afford to make mistakes. You can't afford to drop passes. You can't afford to shoot yourself in the foot. And not just the Bucs, it's everybody. One bad half and you're out. We saw that tonight. Just got done watching the Lions lose to the 49ers. A game where they were up 24-7 at halftime, and the Lions just came out and made mistakes in the second half. They beat themselves. Now they're going home. They were in the driver's seat, up 17 points to go to the Super Bowl. And now they're watching it. So it's just, it's disappointing. It's frustrating. But you can't dwell on it. I've taken a week. I'm just about over it. I'm still annoyed by it. But, that's what playoff football is. And looking back on it, I think I'm satisfied with the season. I said from the beginning of the year, you go out, you win 10 games, you win your division, and then we'll talk playoff matchups when we get there. Oh, we got there. Mission accomplished. And then I said, okay, Eagles team's playing really bad. Bucs are playing really good. I expect them to win this game. That's the expectation. And they won it by a lot. Again, mission accomplished. At the bar. Won in the Lions game. Thought they had a chance to win it. I thought these are two even teams. Maybe favor the Lions a little bit because they're at home. They came in, they played a good game, but they made too many mistakes and lost. No shame in it. Disappointing, frustrating, but no shame. So yeah, I think I'll look back on this season and say it was successful. Not as successful as I wanted it to be, but overall it was a good year. And because of that, Todd Bowles, come on down. You're still the head coach of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Kudos. Kudos all around. Someone who was certainly on the hot seat for long portions of this year. I mean, when this team was 4-7, I mean, how many future head coaching articles did you see for the Bucs? Is it going to be this guy or that guy, Ben Johnson, Bobby Slowick, all these names being thrown around? But credit to Todd Bowles. Sturdy presence, calm hand, never rattled. The locker room was never rattled. They made adjustments. They got it back on track, and they did what they had to do. So I give a lot of props to Todd Bowles. I certainly have criticized him over the years. Certainly don't think he's a perfect coach. But you know what? He has the locker room. Everyone in that locker room loves Todd Bowles. They all come to play for Todd Bowles. He develops players. Players come to Tampa and get better. Not just someone like Baker Mayfield, who is a nominee for Comeback Player of the Year, but guys like KJ Britt. He was nothing when the Bucs drafted him. He was an old school between the tackles thumper of a linebacker. And now he's a really quality player. Very solid starter. Guys like Chris Izzian, undrafted free agent, developed into a starting nickel on this team. Guys like Zion McCollum, all the tools in the world, looked absolutely lost as a rookie, looked pretty functional this year. One more year, he could be a really solid player. So I got to give Todd Bowles credit for that. He has developed players. He has made players better. And, the defense, it's been as good. It has not dropped off. Now, there are times I'm critical of it. There are times I'm frustrated that they play a lot of soft coverage until they get to the red zone, and then they lock it down. And I think to myself, you could have locked this down 50 yards ago and not been in this position. But end of the day, they were still a top 10 defense in points allowed. They did not let opponents score touchdowns. I mean, that's what it's all about. You don't let the opponent score. Todd Bowles, he has kept things going. And that's what he does. Defense, as much as I'm critical of what he does sometimes on the field, at the end result, it's always the same. Todd Bowles puts a good defense on the field. What you're going to get. You're going to get a lot of blitzes. You're going to get a lot of press coverage, a lot of man coverage, and then stupidly out of nowhere, you're going to get a lot of zone coverage, a lot of off coverage. You're going to get pass rushers dropping into coverage. And, the ups and downs of the season, it's a roller coaster. It's frustrating. It's great. It's everywhere in between. But you know where you're ending up at the end of it with a really good defense. So I think Todd Bowles has earned another year or two as head coach. If things fall off the wagon next year, we can talk about replacing him next year. But going into this season, his job should feel fairly safe. And looking a little bit ahead to next season, we're going into it again with some uncertainty. Dave Canales, Buccaneers rookie offensive coordinator, first-time play caller, did a really nice job for this team. I thought he brought a great system in. I thought he was up and down as a play caller, but I think overall he was a lot more good than bad. and now he's going to the Carolina Panthers. That's a huge loss. That's a huge loss. A guy you just got, a guy who installed an offense that has been very successful, that has revived Baker Mayfield's career. And we went through the growing pains as a play caller. It was rough early on. It was rough halfway through. There was times it was rough towards the end of the year. But you knew you were going to get that from a guy who's never done it before. And the expectation was he was going to learn, he was going to grow, he's going to come back better next year. Not going to have that opportunity now. Not with Tampa Bay. It's unfortunate. He's someone I really appreciated in terms of his transparency, how open he was with the questions he answered, how detailed he was, how open-minded he was. Dave Canales was an absolute treat to listen to. And I think the Panthers got a good one. I don't know he's going to be successful because that is just a cluster of an NFL job. Just horrible, horrible situation he's walking into when you think about ownership, not having a first-round pick in the coming draft. It's really rough, and I think it's an uphill battle for him to succeed. But I think he's got all the tools to be successful. So I wish him well. And that leaves us in the position of, okay, who's going to replace him? Not an easy question. I think there were a lot of names, that have come out over the last couple of days. And slowly but surely, before the Bucs have even really got their foot in the door, some of those names have already taken jobs. My top guy was the quarterback's coach for the Rams, Zach Robinson. He's already been hired by the Falcons. I think that was a great hire for Atlanta. Not only are they getting a really good coach, but they're taking him away from the Bucs and potentially the Panthers. Potentially the Saints who are looking for an offensive coordinator. So I was disappointed to see him go there. Kellen Moore going to Philadelphia. He was someone who was on the Bucs short list. So, some of these top candidates who I think the Bucs were interested in, who I was interested in, are already starting to take jobs. And kind of similar to last year, Bucs feel like they're the last one at the party. See a comment from Christopher Cole. Do we promote Thad Lewis or do we go outside? I think with these candidates slowly being hired away, I think Thad Lewis is the front runner. I think learning under Dave Canales for this year, learning this system, I think that's a benefit because you want to keep the same system. You want to keep the continuity. You want to keep things as much the same as we had them to keep the train rolling. And, by all accounts, everyone said Thad Lewis is super bright. He's got a real future in the league as a coach. But how much can you pick up in a year? How much did he retain from Dave Canales about this system? I'm not sure. That's going to be part of the interview process. How does he take that and improve on it? I don't know. Maybe an outside guy who's more familiar with that system is a better play. Just depends on how much Thad Lewis learned in this past year. I would assume he's learned a lot. And it, by all accounts, is the Bucs really like him. They've blocked him from interviewing in other places, so they want to keep him. And if you're going to block him from interviewing from other offensive coordinators, it's kind of a strong indication that you might want him to be your offensive coordinator. But there are still some names out there who I think are definitely worth looking at, and I think the Bucs would be smart to interview and potentially hire. My man Garrett Ballard, co-host, will be back on the show next week. One of his top names, and a guy I really like, is Gerard Johnson. He is the quarterback's coach for the Texans. And Texans, obviously, they kind of came out of nowhere this year. Made the playoffs, won a playoff game. Did they win a playoff game? They lose to the Browns. They won. They won the playoff game. Yeah, and they did it with a rookie quarterback. They did it with an offensive philosophy that is pretty similar to this one that the Bucs are running now. So Kind of similar to Dave Canales last year. Quarterback coach, did great work with his quarterback. It was unexpected how successful they were. Is he that next guy to get that bump? Is he that next up-and-coming coach? Can he help Baker Mayfield develop even further? Baker had a bounce-back year, had a really good year, best year of his career. Now you want him to build on it. Is Gerard Johnson that guy who takes him to the next level? He might be. His track record says there's a strong possibility he could. So I think that's a name that I know Garrett's very interested in. I'm very interested in. At that point, at where we're at right now, if they're going to go outside, that's probably my top name. I know the Lions have also had a quarterback's coach or an assistant passing game coordinator, something like that. He's been getting a lot of buzz. I think he interviewed for the New England OC job. He's a name worth kicking the tires on. Detroit, obviously, has had a great offense the last several years. Ben Johnson, their offensive coordinator, looks like he's going to be the new head coach in Washington. So, you've got a guy who's got a chance to sit behind him and learn. It's worth looking at. Another guy in that position, former Buccaneer assistant, Antoine Randall L. And I believe they've interviewed him. I think I read that somewhere. But Randall L., he was a coach with the Bucs when they won the Super Bowl a few years ago. After that, he went to Detroit. He was a big part of the development of Amon-Ra St. Brown, a guy who was a fourth-round pick, and Randall L. helped develop him into an All-Pro. And, a big part of that, I think, is the natural talents and ability of Amon-Ra St. Brown, but some of that is coaching, too. He watched and learned and saw what Chris Godwin did here in Tampa, part of developing that with Bruce Arians. And Amon-Ra plays a very similar role. So he took what he learned here, brought it there, and was very successful. Now, if he can take some of that Ben Johnson, Detroit Lions offensive magic, bring it back to Tampa, I think there's a lot of reason to think he could be successful with that too. The only thing I don't love is different style of offense. The Lions run a very different style of offense to what the Bucs run. Bruce Arians ran a very different style of offense to what the Bucs are running now. So, as much as I really like Antoine Randall L., and I think there's a lot of good there, I don't know if he's a perfect fit for what the Bucs are bringing back. So, if I were to put my money on it right now, it would be Thad Lewis. That's where I'm at. But I really do think Gerard Johnson from the Texans is a name to watch. If not here, I do think he's going to get a look somewhere else. All right, so that's enough for dwelling back on this past season. We're going to have the whole off season to look back on this year and say, man, Mike Evans is really good. Man, Levante David is really good. Man, Kalijah Kancey had a great rookie year. Yaya's got a bright future, all these things. We have plenty of time to reflect on the year that was. But the offseason is here now. And the first major event of the NFL draft is coming up next week. So I wanted to preview it before we got there. NFL Senior Bowl is a week from yesterday. So 6 days away. You can find it on NFL Network. And all the top prospects from the senior class essentially are going to be there. The tippy top guys never go, first overall pick, fifth overall pick. Those top 10 guys very rarely attend these kind of events because they have nothing to gain from it. They're already a top 10 pick. But there's going to be a lot of talent to be had. And the Bucs are notorious for drafting Senior Bowl guys. I think last season alone, Jason Light drafted 4 or 5 guys that went to the Senior Bowl. I know Cody Mock was one, Yaya Diaby was one, Trey Palmer, Servasier Dennis, all Senior Bowl guys. Every year, Jason Light gets a couple of them. So, I want to look at this year's Senior Bowl roster and kind of highlight a couple of guys who I think will be on the Bucs' radar. So I had my man Garrett map out a couple of his favorite prospects. and I've mapped out a couple of mine, and I want to just kind of preview them for real quick. So I'll start with Garrett because, even though he's not here, Garrett's a little bit extra. He gave me, I think, a list of 6 or 7. And honestly, most of them are on my radar. If you go to bucksreport.com, you can check out these Senior Bowl preview articles. You'll probably see 5 of these 7 names listed as guys the Bucs are going to be looking for. So the first one Garrett wanted to highlight was the center from West Virginia, Zach Frazier. Zach Frazier is someone who's got a lot of experience. He is someone who's incredibly athletic, incredibly mobile. He's a perfect fit for a zone system. And he's a little bit undersized, 6'2", about 305. Not a big mauler kind of guy, but he's scrappy. He's got shades of Jason Kelce to him. He's someone who he was a state wrestler in high school, and how that just translates to the trenches. You get your hands on a guy, you want to manhandle him, you want to maul him. That's something that applies in both wrestling and offensive line play. So he's got that background. And he just absolutely excels at getting to the second level, making blocks on linebackers, making blocks on safeties. We call those touchdown blocks. You make a hole at the line of scrimmage, if you can get a block on the second level, that's where you get your big plays. Zach Frazier excels at that. So if he's not the best center in the draft, he's the second best center in the draft, and he might even be a better fit for what Tampa Bay wants to do. Next guy Garrett wanted to highlight, another center, this one from Georgia, Cedric Van Pran. Highlights him as an incredible athlete, a people mover in space. He started 44 straight games. He was part of those national championship teams. I think they lost 1 game in 3 years. Van Pran was the heart of that offense. He was right there in the middle. He is experienced. He is, got the pedigree. He's not someone I love as much, but this is someone Garrett really likes. And I think he's got a lot to show at the Senior Bowl. It's going to be a big week for him. Let's see. We got another center, third straight center. Are we sensing a theme? Offensive line. Going to be a need the Bucs have to address this year. But the third one Garrett wanted to highlight was the center from Oregon, Jackson Powers Johnson. And this is another one I really like. I really like Frazier. I really like Powers Johnson. These are 2 guys I fully give my stamp of approval. But Johnson's really solid at everything. He's really good at everything. He can move really well. He can get to the second level really well. He's got good size, 320 pounds. He's really smart. He just does it all, and he does it at a high level. His hands are good. If he gets hands on you, he's going to, clamp on. He's not afraid to put people in the dirt. Just everything. You really like it with JPJ, Jackson Power Johnson. And he's someone who could play guard. He's someone who will probably play center. But he's athletic. He can do either. So I don't know if this is someone who is going to go in the first round. I think a lot of people believe him to be the best center in the draft. I think I tend to agree with that. But this is someone who the Bucs should target. If not in the late first round, trade back early second round. He's not going to last long in the second round. He's a really good player. But he's someone the Bucs should absolutely be looking at. Next up, we're flipping to the defensive side of the ball. Edge rusher, the other big need for this Buccaneers team. It's interior offensive line, and it's edge rusher. You got Yaya, you feel good about the future there, but you need someone across from him. Garrett highlights Alabama edge rusher Chris Braswell. Chris Braswell, he's a really interesting prospect. I actually watched him the other day. He's very powerful, very strong, power player, really, really, really good athlete. He just pops off the tape. And he's just a hammer, dude. He is going to get in the tackle's chest and he's going to try and run through him. He's really strong at the point of attack. He sets the edge, and you just don't want to run at him. He's too strong. He's too, high intensity, high motor. Really, really fun player. He's even dropped into cover some, which Todd Bowles is going to love. Todd Bowles asks a lot of his edge rushers. Jason Light really, really values good athletes. Braswell checks both of those boxes. My only concern with him is he's a bit of a one-trick pony. He's all power all the time. No finesse to his game. He doesn't have refined pass rush moves. He doesn't have, the ability to kind of win around the edge consistently, sack the quarterback. He's running through the offensive tackle, collapse in the pocket, or he's not winning. A lot of upside there because he's a really great athlete. But right now, I do have concern about his pass rushing. But you know what? I would have said the same thing about Yaya Diaby. Power player, not refined in his other moves. It's worked out pretty well so far. So I think he's someone to be on the radar. I think I'd probably target him in the second round rather than the first round. But I think he's someone that Jason Light will like. Someone who Todd Bowles will like. Garrett's next guy, and this is a guy I haven't seen yet, so I'm not familiar with his game. But his name is Malik Mustafa, safety from Wake Forest. Garrett lists him as versatile. He's used in the slot a lot, which is something that I think the Bucs should be looking at. He does a lot of box stuff. He's, plays a lot of deep. It's very versatile. Has the physicality to play in the box and has the range and athletic ability to make plays on the back end. I haven't seen him, but based on Garrett's description of him, he kind of fits the bill for what the Bucs need. And I've got a guy on my list who it's going to be similar. So we're kind of on the same theme there. Last guy Garrett brings to the table, tight end from Kansas State, Ben Sinnott. This is a guy I like too. He's the one I listed as one of the top offensive prospects to watch for the Bucs. Really good hands, really dependable pass catcher, pretty good athlete, pretty good blocker. He just does it all. Super well-rounded. Lines up a bit of everywhere. Inline, wing, fullback. He's even lined up out wide sometimes. He's just well-rounded. And personally, I think, in a year or two, he could be your starter and Cade Otton's your backup. I think he's just one of those guys who you can play him in any situation. If you want to run the ball, you can use him as a blocker at the point of attack. You can put him in motion. You can just do anything with him and trust that he'll do a pretty good job. So Ben Sinnott, he's a guy I really like. I think he's one of the better tight ends in the draft. Not the top, one or two tight ends, but you're looking for a guy on day 2, day 3, early on. Sinnott's going to be one of those guys you look for. All right, so those are the guys that Garrett wanted highlighted. Most of them have my stamp of approval, with the one exception I haven't seen. And then I don't love Van Pran as much myself, but you need interior offensive line help. That's what the Bucs need to be looking for. So I stamp that part. I wanted to talk about my 5. And, I didn't stick as much in the trenches, even though it's probably the Bucs' biggest need. Same with edge. I didn't really address the Bucs' 2 biggest needs as much. Part of that's because Garrett did, and I didn't want to double up on prospects. Jackson Powers Johnson, someone I definitely think should be highlighted. Same with Zach Frazier. But, I put more guys who are playmakers, more guys in the back end of the defense. My first guy, Mikey Sanders-Still out of Michigan. And he is just an absolute baller. He does everything really well. He's a nickel corner, so his value is going to be a little bit depleted because he's a nickel guy. But he's someone who's played on the outside. He lined up against Marvin Harrison Jr. in the Ohio State game, and he held his own. He's a little bit small, 5'10", 185, but he's super quick, really good in coverage, and he makes plays. Former wide receiver. He's got really good ball skills. He's a gritty tackler. Maybe not the best tackler, but he's one of those guys who will latch onto you and he'll bite your ankle until someone gets there to help, and he will try and twist you down whatever way he can. He will fight for tackles, even though he's undersized. So he's got the toughness, he's got the mentality, he's got the grit, all things I want in a nickel. And one thing I think needs to be highlighted, he's very much like Antoine Winfield Jr. in this way. Loves to force fumbles. He gets his hand on the ball. He makes you be very aware of ball security. And if you're not, he makes you pay. So I really like this kind of target because it fills two needs. One is your nickel, which I think coverage-wise can be improved from last year. And Sanders still is a great coverage player. And two, that gives you the ability to bump Chris Izien to strong safety, which is his natural position. He's a guy who's a safety and a nickel. So he can play either, and I feel fine with it. But if you can upgrade your coverage in nickel, strong safety, it wasn't great in coverage. Ryan Neal left a little something to be desired. So if you can move Izien there, upgrade your coverage there through Izien, a guy who can play nickel still. He's a guy who can tackle. He can be in the box. We've seen that over and over from him. I think you're kind of upgrading two positions with one if you look at a guy like Mikey Sanders still. So he's someone I think the Bucs should absolutely look at in the late second, third round-ish. Next guy on my list, I'm looking at the offense. I'm thinking about, and I hate to say this, I'm thinking about life after Mike Evans. Maybe life after Chris Godwin. What is your offense going to look like 3 or 4 years from now? You need that next wave of playmaker. And I think this guy's a really good start. His name is Ladd McConkey, wide receiver out of Georgia. And I think a lot of people are going to overlook Ladd. He's kind of a scrawny-looking white guy, but Ladd is super quick. His route running is really good. He can stop on a dime. He can accelerate. He's a separator. He's a guy who I think can come in and really be a problem for teams as a slot receiver. And he can play outside too. He's not limited to the slot. This isn't Wes Welker. Ladd can move all over. He's a weapon. Put him in motion, line him up outside, line him up inside. He can do anything. Because he's not just quick. And he's not just sneaky fast. He's legitimately fast. Well, Ladd McConkey will run by people. So, I really like that. You got big Mike Evans, downfield threat. Chris Godwin, he's tough. He's, I don't want to call him a possession receiver, but, he's so sure-handed. He makes plays over the middle. Ladd McConkey might be a better pure separator than both of them. His quickness is just unmatched by the guys like that. And that's not to say he's better than guys like Evans or Godwin. But in that specific skill set, he's better. So sign me up for the quickness and the separation ability of a guy like Ladd McConkey. He's projected to be a second or third round pick. Absolutely worth a look. My next guy is probably my favorite player in the draft. And I think he brings the right mentality. He fits the Bucs' biggest need. And he's just really, really good. It's Troy Fontenot. He's the left tackle for Washington. He is projected to move into guard. And he's just perfect for what the Bucs are looking for. 6'4", 317, 320 pounds. Big guy. He has the strength and frame to move inside. It's also someone he's super athletic. He moves really well. He can get to the second level. He can make blocks in space. If you want to just power behind him, he can down block on tackles. We see him do it at Washington. And we haven't seen him do it at guard, but he's played guard in his past. And just watching him, listening to him speak, when you talk about guys who have that dog in them, just that absolute pit bull mentality, that's what Troy Fontenot's got. He's got an intensity about him that I really like. And you see it in his just the way he carries himself on the field. He's got an offensive lineman, but he's got like the half shirt to where his belly's hanging out, and he just owns it. That's his persona. That's almost as good as a fullback with a neck roll. So I love his character. I love the way he carries himself, and I love his game. He's light on his feet. He's going to be a really good pass blocker. He's got the length. He's got the strength. He's got the quickness, and he's got the mobility and the understanding of angles to get to the second level and be that zone blocker. So he's someone, even as a guard, I would take at 26. If he's there, I think Jason Licht should sprint to the podium. I know guard isn't the highest position of value. It's not a sexy position, but it's what the Bucs need. It's absolutely what this team needs. So sign me up. You got a player, go get him. So I hope to read, a week from now, that the Bucs have met with him. They've interviewed him. He's on their radar. Because I think he'd be a great addition. Last offensive guy, running back. You need a running back to complement Rachaad White. Rachaad White, he's great in space. He's a great pass catcher. He's okay as a ball carrier. I think with a better offensive line, he can be really solid. But you need a guy behind him. You need a guy who can bang between the tackles. And I don't know if this is that guy perfectly, but I think he can be. I think you can use him that way, and he can be effective. It's Kamani Vidal, running back out of Troy. And, I don't know if he's that between the tackles guy because he's only a guy who's like 5'8". He's small. But he's also 215 pounds, 220 pounds. He's stout. He's like a bowling ball. He does not go down on first contact very often. He's a guy who can catch a little bit. He can make a man miss in space. He was the second leading rusher in college football last year. And he's not someone who has breakaway speed. You can catch him from behind, but he's got great acceleration. He hits the hole at 100 miles an hour. And he's got good vision. And he just is someone who will not go down on first contact easy. Not that Rachaad White does, but, the Bucs need to improve their goal line offense, their red zone offense. They need a little bit more of a physical presence. And I think a guy like Vidal can be that. You just hand him the ball. He's going to bounce off a linebacker, spin forward, pick up 3 or 4 extra yards. Rachaad White does a pretty good job of that, but I don't want Rachaad White taking that much punishment. Rachaad White, he's better used in other ways. And if you can take a late round pick and spend it on a guy like Vidal, a guy who you can give that punishment to, who you can give goal line touches to, sign me up. There's no point in drafting a guy like Blake Corum in the 2nd or 3rd round when you can get basically the same skill set in Kamani Vidal in the 5th, 6th, 7th round. I absolutely think they're comparable players. One went to University of Michigan, one went to Troy. Guess which one will get drafted higher? And I would not be surprised at all if Vidal has a better career. I see a lot of Kareem Hunt when I watch Kamani Vidal. Not the biggest guy, but he's stout, he's tough, he gets the job done. So that's a guy who I really like. Now my last guy, a guy people in Florida will be familiar with. I know I'm all the way up here in Michigan. People in Florida, y'all are big on things like the Gators and the Seminoles. This one's a hurricane. Cam Kinchins, not Kitchen, but Kinchins. Safety for Miami. This is kind of my ideal strong safety. He does all the things I want my strong safety to do. 1, he's a great athlete. He's got great range. He's going to come downhill and hit people at 100 miles an hour, and he's not out of control when he does it. A lot of times, these strong safeties, these big hitters, they're out of control. They're looking to lead with their shoulder, make contact. A lot of times, ball carriers will bounce right off them. Kinches is pretty sound as a tackler. So, in terms of a run defender, I think he's going to be a really good player. The other thing I love about him is he's got great ball skills. He gets a ton of interceptions. And he's not a guy who I think is this lockdown center fielder as a safety. If you want to do split stuff with him where he's got half the field and Winfield's got half the field and they both just take a half, I think you can do that fine. But this is not a coverage safety per se. But he's got great ball skills like he is. So if you test him, if you try and take a shot at him, he will make a defense pay. He's got the speed and athletic ability to get basically anywhere, and he's got the ball skills to make plays. He is a little over-aggressive, which, if I've got the option of the guy being over-aggressive or under-aggressive, I want him to be over-aggressive. You can coach that out of him a little more. You can't make somebody aggressive when they're not. So, over-aggressive, it's a problem I can live with as long as the coaching gets it out of them. And Todd Bowles is the best in the business. No one knows safety play better than Todd Bowles. So if he gets his hands on a guy like Cam Kitchens, who is an incredible talent, this could be a pair of all-pro safeties. This could be, the Legion of Boom with Cam Chancellor and is it Earl Thomas? No. Was it Earl Thomas? Anyway, incredible pair of safeties. That's appealing. That's very appealing to me. It might take a first-round pick to do it, but if you can get Cam Kitchens and you can develop him like we know Todd Bowles can do, your back end is set. Antoine Winfield, Cam Kitchens. There's not going to be a better safety duo in the league. So that's about 12 guys of a roster of, 100. But I think these are all guys the Bucs should be looking at. Some first round, some day 2, some day 3. It's a smorgasbord. You got it all. I'm really excited for this group of Senior Bowl. There's a lot of talented players there. A lot of needs that the Bucs need to fill. Wide receiver, deep. Interior offensive line, very deep group. Running backs, you can find a bunch of running backs. It's a very interesting running back class with no spectacular talent at the top like last year, but there's a lot of talent to be had. All right, so that's going to about wrap it up for me today. Again, I know Garrett wishes he could be here. I know he wanted to go more in depth on some of these guys. Garrett and I, we both cut our teeth with the NFL draft before we started covering the Bucs. This is kind of where we live. This is our niche. In-season stuff is obviously great. We love talking Bucs. We love talking X's and O's. We love, watching this team most of the time, depending on what's going on. But my first love is the draft. Probably because the Bucs were so bad for so long. Maybe it's because I grew up in Detroit, but the draft has always been where my heart lies as much as anything. So I'm excited. I'm excited for the Senior Bowl. I'm excited to see these prospects. I'm excited to watch these practices. I'm excited to see what guys are going to fit with this team. Not just their play style, but in their culture. I think there's a lot of options. I really do. I think this is going to be another year where the Bucs draft 3 or 4 guys from this group. So keep an eye out. I know I'm not going to be the only one watching. Let me know who you like. Let me know who's on your radar. You can find me on Twitter at Icewater Olson. You can find this podcast, the Creamsicle Chronicle podcast, at Creamsicle Crew. Of course, all of my written work is on bucksreport.com. You can find the podcast there. So until next time, we will meet again Friday at 9:30 at our regularly scheduled time. We'll discuss some of these prospects and the week they had at the Senior Bowl, talk about fit, talk about who the Bucs are meeting with. Until then, I am JT Olson. Go Bucs.